Very much, General. That's beautiful. Yeah. Hello again. Our theme for the month is the power of receiving. And we are using the book by the same title, The Power of Receiving by Amanda Owen. And the topic for the day comes from the book, and it's, Are You a Receiver? When I was looking at the material, I was reminded of a workshop I attended about communication. And one of the important pieces that I remember from the workshop was that in order for communication to take place, there has to be both a transmitter and a receiver. Right? They are component parts of this thing called communication. It's no use if I just stand here and speak and no one listens to me. I'm very grateful that you show up. Right? For communication to take place, there has to be that reciprocal relationship. And so it is with giving and receiving. Both are necessary. Turns out that some people are really good at one side of it and not the other. Now, some people are really good at transmitting. Right? Similarly, some people are really good with giving. I think some people become good givers to cover up their discomfort around receiving. How would I know? And I think there are some ideas from our society that contribute to this discomfort around receiving. Ideas such as receiving means weakness. It's very common in our culture to think that. Or it's more blessed to give. Or if I receive something from you, then I have to give you something of equal or greater value for it to be okay. And so along with receiving comes this unwanted obligation. Or another version of that is if I receive something from you, you're going to have expectations. You might be giving that to me for some reason that is not disclosed. Right? Now, some people have difficulty with receiving that is built into the way in which they receive. They have an energy around their receiving. It's a style that's icky. Right? It doesn't feel good. They might even receive with a sense of entitlement. You should give that to me. Or they may receive in such a way that it's empty, hollow, missing the thank you part. And that's not the same as receiving. That's taking. And that's the topic for next week. Are you a taker? Right? Because taking doesn't care about the other person. Taking is one-sided. It's something worth considering. Examine, what is the style of my receiving? Is it off-putting? Is it gracious? Is it awkward because of all the things going on in my head? Is it controlling because it's more like taking? Or is it natural? And who were the role models in my family of origin where I learned all of this giving technique, receiving technique? My role model was my grandmother. She was a very gracious receiver. And if you gave her something that she didn't want or didn't like or didn't need, you, the giver, would never ever know that. Because she would receive it with such joy and such a smile and such a thank you. And so when I talk about her style of receiving, people have sometimes asked me, but was she being genuine? Well, I think she was, because of what she was focusing on. She was more focused on the act of your giving than on the object that was being transferred from one person to the other. To her, your act represented your love, and she loved that. So no matter what form the giving came in, she could never be disappointed because it always represented the same thing. So her thank you was as genuine as you could get. It made it very easy to give to her because she was so skilled, I would say, at receiving. Her attitude around receiving was one of thank you in almost every case, except for one. She had an Achilles heel like so many of us. She had a weakness, and her weakness was around receiving physical help. Because to her, that meant she couldn't help herself. See, she had a degenerative bone disease that eventually made it very difficult for her to walk, to stand up, to hold things. But she did not appreciate offers of assistance. And because she couldn't receive assistance, it made it very difficult to know exactly how or when or if to help. There's a paradox. It's just like the lady who is described in the opening of this book, the lady whose home was devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and she's on an interview, and she's very upset, obviously, for losing her home, but also upset because now she found herself in a position where she had to receive help. And that was something she didn't do well with at all. She's the type of woman who is fiercely independent. She would take 2 jobs just to make everything work. She had never taken handouts from anyone. Kind of describes many of us, right? And as I read about her story, I realized that learning how to receive is the activity that balances our giving, and you really can't have one without the other. If you practice just one side of it, it's like having a bicycle just with one wheel. It doesn't really go anywhere. Like if you only receive, that results in toxicity. Like the Dead Sea, right? You know why it's the Dead Sea? Because it only has inlets. There's no outlets. So as all of the nutrients and everything pours into the Dead Sea, it rises in concentration so much that it is no longer hospitable to life. Similarly, if you only practice giving, then there are only outlets, and if everything is pouring out in one direction all the time, it results in emptiness, burnout, exhaustion. In the book, she describes the symptoms of a non-receiver as being an underlying feeling of being unappreciated, physical exhaustion, lingering or building resentments, spiritual depletion. But when you put giving and receiving together, now you are creating a spiritual ecosystem in which mutual nourishment can arise. It's now possible. You're creating a system in which closeness and warmth can flourish, where wholeness arises because we permit interconnectedness and interdependency to be valued. I was thinking about my grandmother and the lady from Hurricane Katrina, and thinking about how sometimes the challenge of receiving is increased when we are in our most vulnerable states. That's the time when it's hardest to receive. At the time when we most need each other. Strange we are. And all because of these beliefs that are running around in us, hidden from our view. And the reality is that we all face moments of vulnerability. We all face moments in which we truly need each other. Like, for example, the empty nest syndrome, or death of a loved one, or the dissolution of a relationship, or the unexpected loss of independence, or a change in status, or pride, or medical health challenge. Any one of those numbers are moments in which we truly need each other. I've had to take a really good look over the years at my aversion to receiving. I'm an excellent giver. And I've always told myself it's because I love being generous. And that's true. And I've always said that giving is one of those spiritual practices that I totally believing and know and understand, and it's true. And what is also true is that I really don't like anyone to pity me. And somewhere along the path, I picked up the idea that receiving and pity were the same thing. So I made sure that I would never have to receive by taking care of everything and everyone by becoming an expert giver. So I would overextend my giving because I thought it would lead to an experience of feeling safe. But it didn't. In fact, it led to a feeling of emptiness and isolation and loneliness. And if I can be completely honest with you, I created an atmosphere in my life in which it was very difficult for anyone to give me the very things that I wanted the most. And if I can be super honest with you, even though I set it up like that, I still resented people who couldn't give me what I wanted. Those who do not know how to receive are attracted to those who do not give. This is where we groan. And those same people invariably refuse the very help that would enable them to manifest their dreams. It's going to be a fun month. Yeah. So to cover my reluctance to receive, maybe you're like this, you attract people who do not know how to give, and then blame them for not being able to give. And then, as you start to wake up to your desire to receive more, now you've got to change them. It's very quiet in here. But if you come to the Center for Spiritual Living, you learn very quickly it's all an inside job. It's pointless looking anywhere else, right? You got to look inside with a magnifying glass. So I started to do that. I started to put my receiving under a magnifying glass and to pay attention to where am I uncomfortable with receiving and finding it pervasive through the system everywhere. Just everywhere. What do I most not want to receive? Well, I noticed I don't like receiving attention, which is odd considering the job I chose. I certainly don't feel comfortable receiving compliments. Notice it. Start paying attention, how I start to feel anxious when receiving help. I start to notice how I deflect advice or flee from kindness. Just begin to notice it. And all because of wrong ideas I have about what kindness means. And so I began to pay attention to my discomfort and receive anyway. That's how I began to practice. And I realized that something I had not taken into account was that receiving is actually a gift that you give the giver. I had not taken into account that my refusing to receive, by doing so, I was actually disallowing closeness, the very thing that I wanted. That I was disallowing anybody to experience me in a state of vulnerability, which made it very hard for people to connect with me. And that I was making things unequal and Just nobody likes that. See, I had turned receiving into the enemy and from time to time replaced it with demanding. We're going to have fun this month, right? I mean, I was trying to have a whole life experience by breathing out only. Let's try that. I would say it's going against the natural balance of life. And our teaching has a law that describes it. It's called the law of reciprocity. And that law describes the beautiful and elegant relationship between all actions and all things. It talks about how breathing in requires breathing out. Breathing out requires breathing in. Giving requires receiving. Receiving requires giving. And doing requires being. And being requires doing. And praying requires meditating. And meditating requires praying. And teaching requires learning. And listening requires speaking. And take one wheel off, and the bike stops. The law of reciprocity describes the interdependent nature of everything, and to truly understand how everything is connected is to understand also that everything is inseparably one, and that giving is receiving, and receiving is giving. Who is the giver and who is the receiver when we look at the relationship between a butterfly and a butterfly bush? They give to each other and receive from each other. Both are fulfilling their goals. So one of my grandmother's gifts to me is that she received my giving. And when I gave to her, the beauty of her receiving was the gift back to me. And as I started investigating my own aversion to receiving, I realized that she was role modeling gracious receiving to me. It just took me 30 years to notice. And so I had to practice relearning the language of gracious receiving all over again. And I could use her as an example. I had to learn, among many things, two I will mention today. That first being receptive. And the second being accepting. Being receptive is an attitude of mind. And it's characterized by certain states of being, certain qualities that are not typically valued in our culture because they are considered to be weak or passive. And they are listed in the book, and I brought some of them with me for you. Meditating, allowing, noticing, including, appreciating, letting be, listening, opening, observing, embracing, being, attracting, feeling, relaxing, welcoming, contemplating, accepting, letting go, yielding, hearing, watching, acknowledging. You get the idea. And coincidentally, as we improve our ability to be in these type of states, they improve our capacity to be in the more active states, where we are accomplishing and planning and doing. However, if all I ever focus on is doing and acting and accomplishing and analyzing and influencing and planning and controlling and pushing and building and thinking and shaping and evaluating, no balance, no reciprocity. I am creating an ecosystem in which I cannot be fed. So an exercise to increase receptivity, a sweet exercise that you can do as a game or a meditation. You can carry a notebook around with you during the day, or you can do it last thing on the day before you go to bed. That's how I like to do it. Again, to bed with a notepad, and what I do is I sit down and begin to notice things for which I'm grateful and acknowledge them so as not to take them for granted. So I literally get in bed and I look around and see, light switch, write it down. Seriously. Bed cover, write it down. And I fill up the whole page, and then tomorrow I start again, and I notice that there are so many layers of things that I have already received. And I haven't even got to the non-physical things yet. It's a beautiful practice. And being receptive comes from acknowledging. The second one is being accepting. Accepting also is an attitude of mind, and it's characterized by warmth and kindness. And it's a practice that you and I can begin to practice right away, starting today, by being kind and warm when anything comes our way. You can try that this week. Practice accepting graciously what comes your way. In particular, focus on compliments as a starting point, a gentle starting point. And gracious receptivity means I don't use negative responses to talk down the compliment, to play down the compliment. So instead of saying, you're too kind, or wondering what it is they want, instead I can respond with something like, thank you for saying that, or it's nice of you to notice, or it's encouraging to hear that, or you made my day. So many people struggle with accepting compliments, deflecting them, returning them to the sender, turning them down. And it raises the question in me, are we training each other to be less kind by doing that? Is that the message we're giving? Is the lack of graciousness in our society related to the dwindling art of receiving well? See, I like to think that it's possible to change that. In fact, I like to think that when I practice receiving, even compliments, I'm contributing something to the world. I'm role modeling graciousness. And I'm also practicing being receptive to the greater good of life. You can do the same thing with gifts, whether it's an item or a service that someone is giving you. I mean, accepting graciously means you don't dismiss the gift by saying, oh, you shouldn't have, or I don't need this, or it's not the right color, or I was hoping for the larger variety. Instead, you can go to the act of the giving and say something, thank you. It means a lot to me that you thought to gift me. I mean, you can do what you like with the gift later. We can always be centers of divine recirculation, right? But I want to leave you with this thought. Receiving is not passive and weak. Receiving is a conscious and powerful choice. Receiving is healthy and wise. And receiving is an act of generosity and kindness that contributes something beautiful to a world that works for everyone. I invite you to breathe in with me and to exhale as your eyes close so we can enter into a moment of prayer in which we remember together that one Spirit from which we all come. That one infinite and perfect Spirit that is everywhere present. And by means of this prayer, we are opening ourselves in mind and body and thought in every way to the inflow and outflow of this brilliant, beautiful light of oneness. By means then of this prayer, then, we are remembering also our interconnectedness, our interdependency, and how we are inseparably one with each other. And so we allow the easy, free, and blessed movement of love and kindness to flow. We abandon all thoughts of fear or the possibility of being controlled. We remember that we have sound minds and clear boundaries, and we understand how to be safe and sound in this world while receiving open-heartedly the gifts that this creation has for all of us. And today we begin with the smallest things: the air that we breathe, the sun that shines, the love that we feel. In deepest gratitude for this and so much more, I release this word of prayer into that infinite law of mind that returns to us an affirmative yes and reflects back to us that which we have prayed. And so it is.